Ruthless Compassion is a podcast that shows you how to become fiercely kind. I'm the host, Dr. Marcia Sirota, and in each episode, I get into it with experts and regular folks about the things that get in the way of what we want. Things like addiction and mental health, isolation and loneliness, difficult family and work relationships, and the importance of self-care. I want to help you overcome the obstacles to living your best life, and I want to inspire you to become a powerful kindness warrior. Megan Bruneau, MA, RCC, is a mental health therapist, wellness coach, writer, and host of the Failure Factor podcast. After struggling with perfectionism, eating disorders, depression, and anxiety for most of her life, Megan discovered a liberating way of relating to herself and to the world. She now helps her clients and readers do the same. Megan's work has been featured in the Huffington Post, Forbes, MindBodyGreen, Entrepreneur, Elephant Journal, Thought Catalog, Bustle, Psych Central, Gaia, and more. Follow her on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Welcome, Megan Bruneau. Welcome, Megan Bruneau, to the Ruthless Compassion podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Marcia.
Well, I'm very excited to have you here today because of your amazing article. Now, I don't remember the name of the article. Can you remind me what it was called?
Definitely. It was called I'm Interested in You. That doesn't mean I'm trying to have sex with you.
Oh, what a title. Even that alone is like, it's a 1-2 punch. So I read this article on Medium just the other day, and it really struck me because I think it is the universal experience of women and maybe a very well-kept secret. Can you talk a little bit about what made you write this article and what it's about?
Yeah. I've had a series of experiences throughout my life that have kind of compounded. And recently, it all kind of came to a crux when I was out for dinner with a friend. And we were chatting and, he mentioned, he was kind of like, I got to be straight with you here, Megan. I don't really understand why you're close to these quote unquote powerful people, because I have some relationships here in New York that are with well-known people. And he said, I've thought about at times if you're an escort. I'll be honest, like other people wonder the same thing. And I was so taken aback. Like I was honestly just like, I lost my words. And that's weird for me because I'm a talker. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like you've got to be kidding. The conversation went on and it was very uncomfortable for me. And, I left that conversation with a lot of shame, and confusion because I think I'd been so used to getting a message in that form, maybe not so explicitly, like it had never been, nobody had ever actually, suggested that to me so explicitly before. However, there had been, mentions in my past successes and things that perhaps I'd gotten there through using my sexuality. And, just as a complete sidebar, I absolutely have like no judgments around, sex work as a profession. I mean, I think like that's, if that's something that you're doing willingly and you can feel good about it and stuff, like that's awesome. However, my problem is with, people assuming that a woman gains her success, through sexuality and not as a means of like her hard work or her intelligence or anything like that. So I left that meeting and, it was, I mentioned this in the article as well. I couldn't really fully access my anger. I have done a lot of yoga in my life and a lot of meditation and have worked very hard to learn how to notice my anger, but not necessarily react to it. However, I think also as women, we're really socialized not to feel anger. It's not feminine, it's not ladylike, but it's also, we're supposed to be nurturing, we're supposed to, be caring. And we're oftentimes really pathologized for feeling emotions, and our emotions are invalidated, sort of as a result of being hysterical or PMSy or something like that. So it took me a few days, and I mentioned it to a few friends, like in confidence, because I was dealing with so much shame around this experience. And they were like, that's really fucked up. That's not okay. And, that was like, that's a pretty bold assumption. Like, even if it was kind of said in jest, which I don't know if it actually was, to be honest. And, so I kind of began to sort of feel a little bit more of that anger. And I was like, this is interesting, because then I reflected and I sat and I thought about all the times in my life, and I can't recall all of them, but, just off the top of my head, there were several that were coming up for me around when I was either, when I was essentially blamed for someone else's physical attraction to me, or when my successes were attributed to being young and blonde, and, it must be because she's sleeping with so-and-so. And, one that really stuck out for me that was a super painful experience was a few years back, about 5 years ago now. And I had a client, whom I'd been working with for a long time. And he had been chronically suicidal since like 9 years old. I think that was his first attempt. And, had attempted again at like 13 and 15 and 17. And anyway, by the time he got to my office, he was 33. I sent him to the hospital in our first session, and I thought I'd never see him again. And he came back, and we worked together for about over a year, actually, but maybe about 6 or 7 months in, he made an attempt, and he sent me a note, and I got the note at 12:01 p.m. And so, I knew that he wanted me to get it. He didn't send it to me 12:01 a.m. Got it to my work email. I can't remember what day of the week it was. And he had said, he was planning on completing suicide. And, and then part of the reason was because of this sort of unrequited love for me, and he could never be with me and such, which is not unusual. Transference is not unusual in a therapy session, like that's a very common experience of therapy. And oftentimes like a really wonderful sign that a person can connect and can feel and can be vulnerable and sense intimacy and all those things. Anyway, I was working with a psychiatrist with this client, who was down the hall. And obviously when I got this note, I brought him in to, the intervention process and said, here's this note I've received. And the psychiatrist looked at me and he said, I knew this would happen with you. From the moment I met you, I knew this would happen with you. And again, I just felt this shame. Like I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is my fault. I have seduced my client. It is because I wear mascara. It is because I wear my hair down. I remember, when I did my master's, this is a sidebar. When I did my master's, I dyed my hair brown and like wore my glasses and, tried to dress as like conservatively as possible because I wanted to cover up any of like the, traditional like femininity or sexuality that I might embody. And so I just felt this like, oh my gosh, I've let it slip, like I've let my true self come through and I have to hide that again. And so, and the interesting thing is like, had I been a male therapist and had my client been female, that would have never happened. It would have been like, oh, well, this, here your client is borderline. This client did actually have a borderline diagnosis, among other things. But, it was like, this is your fault. It's your fault that this person is, suicidal or actively attempting right now. So I had that. I really like this more recent experience with this friend brought back that experience really closely, along with so many other experiences that I've had. I mean, after that was a pretty traumatizing experience for me as a practitioner. And I obviously sought consultation and, really wanted to work through it and be like, is there something that's happening here? Am I perhaps like unknowingly coming onto my clients, And, I actually worked with a male therapist and he kept coming back to the fact that I was single. And he kept saying like, I think at the time I was like 26 or so. And he was just like, you're getting in your later 20s and, your friends are getting married and, you're a single woman. And I imagine that's really hard and you're lonely. And like, so you're expressing this sexuality and desire and, yearning to connect and things like in your therapy relationships. And I was so frustrated. I remember at the time, I just said to him, I was like, do you feel like I'm coming on to you right now? And he was so taken aback. He was like, well, no. And I was like, I just like, I am a friendly person, and when you're having like therapy sessions are obviously like very intimate, little incubators where we can help people open up to their difficult experiences and their pain and support them and give them an experience that maybe they've never had before. And like they are very boundaried and there is very clear conversations should transference be coming up and about the actual relationship. And I guess it was frustrating because I just have felt that consistent invalidation and sort of this belief that like, I don't necessarily really know what I'm doing. And I'm kind of this like reckless seductress going around. And then the other experiences that came up for me that were really in line with that were experiences I've had personally, like where I've had, either attempted sexual assaults or, something close to that. And it's been a result of, I believe, like a misinterpretation of my friendliness. And it's really tough because I think it leads us women believing that we have to be really bitchy and cold and closed off because we have to protect ourselves. The couple examples I cite in the article are, accepting a ride home and then having a person like essentially try to rape me, accepting the invitation for a nightcap after a date, which I know many women can relate to because, you think that you trust the person and then things go really horribly and you feel incredibly unsafe. And again, I am like fighting my way out of essentially a stranger's apartment. And the thing that frustrates me too is that, I imagine a lot of people listening are like, well, that's like so stupid. Like, why would you go back to a person's place, right? But that's again, this culture of victim blaming that we do and, blaming the woman. And so there's now this sort of expectation that women have to be like hyper vigilant, hyper guarded, hyper bitchy. And if they're really nice, then it's a sign of like their naivety or a sign of their sexuality or they're trying to seduce someone. And to me, that's just so sad because I think one of the biggest issues in our society that I see with all of my clients is this like deep, deep loneliness and like pathological disconnection that really leads to depression and psychosis and, all sorts of pathologies that are actually just a result of disconnection. And if we were able to be a little bit more connected and we didn't just assume that a person's friendliness or interest or, connection was sexually motivated, then we'd probably be a lot happier. So I just talked for like a really long time there. So.
No, but it's so exciting what you're saying because I'm just sitting here nodding. And I wanted to actually jump right in with what you said about connection because I so agree with you. I think we are so sadly alienated from one another. But I think that what you said about how people misunderstand, especially a woman's warmth or friendliness, and they project sexuality into it. And so then we're forced to be colder, much colder than we would otherwise choose to be in order not to somehow be mistaken for being a seductress. And I think you're right. I think we have sexualized our society so much, to such a great extent that friendliness is often misinterpreted. And so then we're left having to be unfriendly. And then, there's more alienation and disconnection. So what do you think, what do you think we can do to get us more connected without people misunderstanding or misinterpreting our friendliness, especially female friendliness as being seductive? If there is a solution, what's your ideas about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because like when I wrote this article, I thought about that. I was like, this part of this is a little bit of a rant. But like, is there something that can come of this? Like, is there sort of a call to action or something that I can ask from people? And I mean, I think obviously like awareness is huge. And that's why I'm so just like inspired by how much, traffic this article has actually had and engagement. And so, I mean, what I ask for there is just entertaining the idea that, a person's interest is not necessarily sexually motivated. Like that really, sometimes people just are interested because they're curious and because they care and they're compassionate and they like to connect. I mean, my entire, I knew that I wanted to be a therapist since I was like 8 years old. And I've always been deeply curious in people. And that's what makes me feel really good is asking people questions and hearing their stories and like really listening to their responses. And it's not like I'm this selfless martyr. Like that just makes me feel good. That's what I enjoy in life. And I know there are many people who feel that way and have a similar experience and are just like genuinely very curious people. You're probably one of them. And so I guess like the first thing is just to like entertain the idea that maybe a person is just genuinely interested and just, as in your person, and we can have an experience of connection that doesn't necessarily relate to, or doesn't necessarily, end in a sexual place, or that's not where it's going per se. Just like we, if we're heterosexual, we have, same-sex friendships that we're not necessarily going to, take to a sexual place, and vice versa. And so, I think that would be my first ask, would be like, yes, like the awareness and just like entertaining that idea and just being curious about the interpretations you might make about a person because of their friendliness. But then also, in the realm of like this loneliness piece and this disconnection piece, I think it would be a fascinating experiment to be able to just see, like, what if we all tried to connect a little bit more, each day? And I don't mean, having to sit down and have like a pseudo therapy session with someone. Like, whenever I'm in Trader Joe's, I notice if I'm like still listening to my headphones when I go to the checkout person, like I notice that. And I'm like, this is interesting. Like, am I purposefully disconnecting? Is there something going on here right now? Like, why is it that I'm blocking this human out of my life and essentially treating them as though they're inhuman? So the last time I was at Trader Joe's, like, I'm chatting about Alan Watts with the cashier. In the end, she's like giving me free things that like someone had left behind. Like, we had this like amazing conversation about yoga and like viewing life as music and versus a journey. Like, that was so meaningful for me to have that moment of connection. And I think it was for her too. And, I think we can have more of those in our days, like whether it is, yes, just like sharing a smile with someone on the street, and, or whether it's like the conversation with the person at CVS or, at Trader Joe's or whatever. Or, if there's just like, if there is a person in your life that maybe you haven't spoken to in a while, and you can just reach out and be like, hey, I'm thinking of you, just want you to know. Right. But I think having these moments of like real authentic connection they're so necessary. Like, I was going to say they're healing, but it's not even, they are healing, but they're also necessary for our survival and for thriving. And without connection, we do move toward loneliness and pathology and depression and anxiety and psychosis and like all of these sorts of things. So I guess like the three answers to your question would be like, first step, awareness and just like curiosity about experiences. Second step, entertaining the idea that a person's kindness or interest or connection or extroversion is not necessarily motivated by sexuality. And it's not to say that it's never motivated by sexuality, obviously, right? That's like what flirting essentially is and can be. So, but it's just being curious about it, just not always making that assumption. And then connecting more, like bringing moments of your connection into your day and being curious about how that makes you feel, and being curious about like when you're purposefully disconnecting, which sometimes we do need to do. There are times when I'm like, what, I am going to keep my headphones in and I'm going to smile, I'm going to be polite, but I don't really feel like getting into a talk about Alan Watts with this cashier, right? But I think just like starting to really notice when we're purposefully disconnecting, if that's like what we need and why, or if maybe that's what depression or loneliness is telling us we need when it's actually not what we need. What we really need is to have a moment of connection. And then just bringing more of those moments into your day and seeing how that affects both you and other people. Because we also know that like helping other people, there's, that very cliche saying, like we rise by lifting others, but helping other people is actually much more effective for, improving our mood than, trying to, I guess, like help ourselves using the same amount of energy. There's a lot of research out there on compassion, which you're probably familiar with. I just listened to Kelly McGonigal's book, The Science of Compassion, and she has some like really, really great studies that she cites in there around like people who are given the opportunity to like help someone versus like do another form of self-care, and just the amount that increases mood and connection, all those sorts of things. So I just think there are like so many positive things that come from connecting and viewing connection as like healing and healthy and normal and necessary, as opposed to viewing it as sexualized.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, I was thinking about this article I just read about Matthew Ricard, who wrote a book called Happiness, and he's called the happiest man in the world. He's a Buddhist monk. Yeah. And he talks about something he calls instrumentalization, which is when people use each other as tools for their aims, as opposed to trying to connect with each other with love and care. Mm-hmm. And so what you're talking about with connection and compassion is the opposite of this instrumentalization that Matthew Ricard talks about. And I think that when people are looking at another person as a sexual object, they're really instrumentalizing us, aren't they? They're saying this person is someone or something I can use for my own gratification, as opposed to this beautiful being that I can connect to and feed my soul by doing so. So instead of trying to feed our soul by having meaningful connections, I think we're trying to feed our baser impulses by using each other. And that's what I think Ricard talks about. And that creates such deep alienation and unhappiness. And then, of course, it creates a vicious circle because you use each other as objects. You feel more alienated. And so you think, oh, maybe I need to just use the other person more. And then it creates this increasing alienation and this increase of the wrong solution. And the real solution is, as you're saying, is to connect more, not to use each other, but to care about each other, to support each other, to be compassionate toward each other.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting because I think it's understandable as to why we've got it wrong. You know, like our connection, as much as we're in this world and we're having this conversation right now, it's really not validated or what's the word that I'm looking for? Like it doesn't have the importance that it really deserves out there, because everything else that comes our way is about sort of like, you know, our independent culture and putting yourself first, which I do believe in to a certain extent. However, we need these pieces or these instances of connection for survival, basically. It's interesting because when I moved to New York, and I didn't really know anyone actually when I moved here. And so I began this process of making friends, which was strange because I'd been in Vancouver for 11 years before that and had a very strong social network. And, and so it was new for me. And I actually began to really understand what so many of my clients had been going through, when they were creating their social networks. And I'm also single. And, you know, the feedback that I consistently have gotten from people is this sort of surprise, like, what, like, you're very different. Like, what's going on? Like, it's almost like they maybe don't trust me a little bit, but like, they're kind of like, what's the catch, right? Because there's just this assumption that, especially in a city like this, unfortunately, where there is a lot of perfectionism and there is a lot of competition and, you know, time is very valuable and, you know, the world does revolve around, it seems, people's social media and, comparing themselves to others and trying to like be the best. And so there's this like distrusting, mentality that a person is just trying to get something from you. And I think that really speaks to what you were saying about Matthew Ricard and the instrumental relationships. Like we've sort of come to expect that that's how relationships are. And it's just so sad because really like it's through these true authentic connections that we feel happiness. And at the end of the day, like, you know, it's not going to matter like how much money you leave behind or like your long CV of accomplishments and things. Like the moments of connection that we have in life and these moments where we feel alive and happy are really all that we have. And then they're gone, you know, like everything else. So, you know, it's no wonder that it's just as this pandemic of like loneliness and depression when people are so focused on these instrumental relationships and competition and like society's view of success, that really disconnects us further and prevents us from experiencing what I think life is all about, which is connection.
For sure. And I think that, you know, when people become commodified, it's very easy to get into cliches. So for example, a rich man becomes a commodity for a certain kind of woman, and a blonde or attractive woman becomes a commodity for a certain kind of man, and so on and so forth. And I think these cliches are very destructive because we become reduced to these cliches as opposed to being seen as full, rich human beings with a wealth of life experience and a heart and a soul. And I think we need to go back to seeing a person as a whole person and not this objectified cliche.
Absolutely. And, you know, I noticed that in, both in like friendships, but also in dating. Like I have many experiences here where, you know, you meet somebody and they start telling you about all of their successes. And it's just an interesting conversation. Like, it's like, oh, okay, well, that's so wonderful. I'm so happy for you. You know, that's so like, you know, I'm trying to reflect, but I'm like, this is just such a different way than, you know, what perhaps I'm used to, or how I might relate to the really close people in my life. I went on a date the other night with someone who one of the first things they said was like, oh, I noticed you don't have your nails manicured. And I was just thinking, I was like, oh, no, I can't remember the last time I got a manicure, to be honest. And I spoke to a girlfriend the next day about it. I kind of joked, and she's like, oh, but that's just like, that's how it is. Like, in that culture, you know, it's very important that a man's partner has her nails done. And like, I was like, oh, okay, well, that just seems it's so bizarre to me. I'm like, should that be the most important thing? I mean, what about like the person's ability to connect and to be there and to, you know, listen, and their life experience, like you said, and what they can offer in so many other ways. So like you said, like, it's, you know, women in particular, of course, we become more objectified, and it's like, you know, how do we look, and how do we enhance that person's life in like this instrumental or functional way that might help them raise their stock for the way the rest of society views them, as opposed to their inner experience of life.
It's a very juicy topic for sure, and I'm so glad that, you know, we've been talking about it today, because I think it really does have to come out there. And I think that what you were really saying in your article is that you're asking people to stop, and instead of just assuming that the surface is who we are, you really want people to stop and say, you know, who is this other person, and see if they can connect from, you know, heart to heart, as opposed to what can I get from them, or what do they want from me?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I think it's like, you know, we speak a lot about vulnerability, and, you know, Brené Brown obviously has been like such a huge player in, making that word, you know, a very common word in the sort of mental health, self-help, personal growth movement. And it's interesting because I guess maybe I'm sort of looking at it from the other side, like in terms of how vulnerability is received, or enhancing or facilitating someone's process of being vulnerable. You know, we place a lot of pressure on the person who is trying to be vulnerable and maybe share a bit more about themselves and let themselves be seen. However, what we haven't maybe addressed is this idea that like, when a person is letting themselves be seen and being their authentic self, we also have a responsibility to honor that, you know, and to not necessarily make judgments or assumptions, and to celebrate that, and to, you know, support that process. And so it's like this co-creation of connection. And that's, I guess, what connection really is. So I guess, you know, it's this sort of other side that's like, when a person is being friendly, connected, interested, vulnerable, you know, allowing themselves to be seen, asking to see you, like, what role do you play in that? And do you shut them down? Do you judge them? Do you put them in a box? Do you objectify them? You know, do you subordinate them? Like, how do you respond to that? Or is there another way where, you know, you can both continue to elevate your consciousness and, you know, become more connected both to each other and to yourselves, and to, you know, a greater purpose, I think, of compassion in this world. And like, what role do you play, and how can you change what society tells you to do, which is, you know, treat those relationships instrumentally and judge those people and disconnect. I guess, like, how can you sort of do the opposite?
Yeah, absolutely. That just touches my heart when you say that.
Aw, that's so wonderful. Well, it touches my heart that you're doing this work. I mean, this is such an important topic, just the entire flavor of your podcast. So it's a real honor to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, I just wanted to have you let the listeners know where they can find you online, so that they can, you know, pay more attention to the things that you're talking about.
Yeah, of course. I would love for, you know, any listeners for whom this topic resonated, please follow me, or, you know, reach out, or, you know, go to my site. I actually, my real sort of expertise areas are around perfectionism, eating disorders, you know, recovering from depression and anxiety and everything like that. And just finding a more self-compassionate way of relating to yourself, and compassionate way of relating to the world and others. So my site is meganbruneau.com. So it's meganbruneau.com. But you can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. I have a blog out there as well. So I've got a lot of stuff, but probably my it's all there housed on my site, meganbruneau.com, which I imagine will probably be in the show notes.
Yes, absolutely. And just to end, although you've probably given us a few of these, I would like you to maybe articulate a call to action for the listeners apropos of our conversation today.
Yeah, I think, like you said, yes, I have probably mentioned a few, but one that I think is probably more clear than some of the things I mentioned is just the next time you're having a conversation with someone, take your phone off the table, or get your phone out of the way. Again, in that book, The Science of Compassion by Kelly McGonigal, she mentions how, people's, I believe it was their cortisol level, I can't remember exactly, it was tested with a person's phone on the table, and just like their level of trust and calm, and having the phone there, even without it lighting up or anything, decreased people's ability to trust and connect. And so, that's something I've been really bringing into my life lately, is like, do I need to be checking my phone when I'm having a conversation with somebody? Like, does it need to be right in front of me? Is it that important? The latest Instagram like that I got, that needs to take my attention away from this person giving me the gift of their story and their attention right now. So I would just ask listeners to just put your phone away for the conversation, look at it afterwards, and just really try to be present with the person you're speaking to, and just notice, like, what a different experience that is, both for yourself and probably for them. So I think that would be my call to action I would hope for from people.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And I'm going to do it myself immediately.
Awesome. Well, let me know how it goes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Megan Bruneau. It's been really a pleasure chatting with you today, and lots of food for thought for the listeners out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
That was the fascinating Megan Bruneau, and I'm Dr. Marcia Sirota. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and review it on iTunes. You can also sponsor me on Patreon at patreon.com/Dr. Marcia Sirota. And please sign up for my free monthly newsletter at marciasirotamd.com.